everyone. Today is release day. My album is finally out. The World as I Know It is available right now on all streaming platforms, and this is a day that I have been looking forward to for so long at this point. Um, if you've listened to the album already, I hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you haven't, then I hope you'll get to it soon, whenever you can. It's my third album. It is my absolute proudest work yet, and it's just one that I've really been excited about putting out there because I think this one has something that the others just so far haven't yet. And I just really love this thing, so I'm happy that it's finally out there and that you listen to it. And I thank you if you have been keeping up, if you've been listening to the singles, if you've been keeping up with all the promo, and if you've been listening since the very first album. Thank you. And yeah, so I'm recording this video today to kind of just give you some behind the scenes, talk about how this album even came to be, and just this kind of just detailed discussion of things that I usually eat up when other artists release their, you know, recording information. And so that's what I'm going to do for you here. I'm going to let you know how this album came to be, talk about some of the songs, and yeah, maybe it'll give you a better understanding of where we're coming from and a better idea of what the whole purpose of this whole thing is. And yeah, so without any further ado, let's start talking. So this project began, like so far all of my other ones, right after the last one came out. Now, the last big project I had out was the Jaded EP, which was 4 tracks. It was this kind of synth indie pop EP that I did that came out in January and was a huge experiment for me because the last 2 albums and this one, but at the time, the 2 albums that came out before were pretty much just rock albums with, mostly acoustic guitars and electric. And even though I kind of experimented with like synths on stuff like Lost or Was It Really Love, it's just I really enjoyed the composition of that, so I went to make an EP full of that kind of stuff. And to this day, I still think it's some of the coolest stuff I've put out. Leave It All Behind and the title track are some of my favorite songs I think I've ever made, and they're still really cool if you've never heard them and checked them out. Really, the whole EPs are, I think, worth a listen. But anyway, by the time that EP came out, I had probably about 4 or 5 songs just left over from previous albums that just, I didn't think were good enough for them, or I just didn't finish them, or didn't have the ideas for them, or had written after them but didn't fit on Jaded, or were just left over from a whole different thing. And so I had a few songs, and I had some ideas for new ones I wanted to write, and I got started in probably late January, and the first brand new written song for this album was Oh Sisters, which eventually released on Valentine's Day. Now, that song was made out of a desire to have... Now, I don't have any traditional, like, love songs. Like, any of my songs that are about love aren't love songs. Like, A Code Was Always There on the first album is about the idea of love, and same thing for Was It Really Love on the second album. They explore the idea of that relating to my own sexuality, but they're not like an outpouring of like, oh, I'm deeply in love with a person or a thing, and so they're not traditional love songs. So I wanted to make one that was, and even then, I can't really say it's a traditional love song because it's not a song about romantic love at all. It's a purely platonic love song to 2 people that in my life are much like family or like sisters, and it's the closest thing I think you'll ever get to me writing an actual love song, but it's not actually any profession of love. But it is one of my favorite songs on this record, and it was such a fun one to write. It was an easy one to make for me because it was just, it does all come from the heart. It is stuff that I feel, and so it just makes it easy to write when you are very passionate about the thing you are writing about. And came together pretty quick. I was very inspired at the time. Green Day, of course, they inspire most of my stuff, really. But also, there's Ruby Soho by Rancid that also inspired that song. And yeah, it was pretty quick to make, to write. And I released it on Valentine's Day because I thought that was just super appropriate. I thought that made sense. And that was the very first single released for the album, which at the time didn't have a name, didn't have a final track list. It was just, hey, here's the first new song for something new upcoming. I don't know when. Eventually, I always had a goal, a goal date of sometime in May. I wanted it to be in the same month that my first album came out last year. I just figured right around the 1 year anniversary was. I didn't think there was anything better, and so with a goal of May set, I kept writing. Now, as for the songs I had left over from other sessions, the oldest song I had on this album was actually from 2022, and that was Me and My Two Moms. Now, that song and Maria on this album were songs that I had written for some other side project I was going to do with a friend sometime around 2023, and it was just something we never ended up following up on, and so they had just been sitting around for a while. I had a finished version of Me and My Two Moms, which this recording you hear on the album is based on. I had a finished recording, mixed and everything, since 2023, just sitting on a hard drive. And Maria I wrote pretty much right after the first album came out, and then just, yeah, it hung around, it didn't do anything. I didn't put it on another album. I just in case something came up, and unfortunately it never did, so I decided that, you know what, I don't want these songs to sit around anymore. I want to use them for my own stuff. And so with that, I took those two songs, I rewrote Maria a little bit. Me and My Two Moms, in there it name drops two of my friends, and, for the sake of courtesy, I of course texted them like, hey, I have this song, I wrote this like 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. Like, it's got your names in it though, like, is it okay if I release this? Like, I can change it, I can not release it at all, like, up to you. If you don't want it out there with your name on it, that's okay. And they both very graciously said yes. And so I went along and I remastered the recording that I had from 2023 and reproduced it to make it fit in with the rest of the tracks on this album. And then Maria, I hadn't even had a finished recording. I had a demo done. So I just had to make a final recording. All the lyrics were pretty much ready to go, although I did change a few things. And that was recorded pretty quickly too. And that, when I eventually released Here We Go Again, that was released as a B-side because it was just so far along so fast. I thought, why not throw it in as a bonus? It's one of my favorite little songs. It's a minute and a half. It's very short. It was another one I came up with really, really quickly and just had down right away. So yeah, we had Me and My Two Moms and Maria for at least 2 years together. And then we had Body Dysmorphia Blues, which eventually became the second single. I had the chords for the verses since Songs from the Gutter, so probably around September of last year, and I just didn't know where to take them. So I wanted a garage rock-esque song on the album, but with those chords, at the time I just couldn't think of where to take that, what's right to go with that, and so I scrapped it. And eventually the garage song on that album became Car Crash City, which is one of my absolute favorites that I've ever done. That's a really fun song. And that came to me so quickly, like at the end of that album, and it's, yeah, one of my favorites. Anyway, so I had those chords, and I saved them. And then I brought them back because I was like, alright, I really want to expand on this. I want to have another garagey tune on this album. And I came up with this idea of, well, why don't I do a comment on fashion and beauty and how society kind of has this really weird, like, way too high standard for everything. And I find this happening all the time, everywhere. And it's something that I see affect people's mental health, that people just they think that they're not good enough for society. You could see the most beautiful person on earth, and they could look at you and say that they are not good enough because XYZ person says so, or because, oh, well, more people like this over this. And it's like, it's confusing and almost kind of upsetting that, people can't just accept their own, they can't accept themselves. And so I wanted to write a song about that. And so then I finally had this more, gave it more of a drive, and was inspired really mostly by this song called Ruby Room by Foxborough Hot Tubs, which is an offshoot of Green Day. And then I kind of just, everything kind of felt like it was setting in motion, and I really liked the direction it was going. And then that song released in April as the second single, still before I think I had the name for the album, and still the May goal in mind. So that became my second single. Then also, from the first album sessions, the title track of this album, The World As I Know It, actually has its origins there. So on the first album, the intro song, Splitsville, that was supposed to be the opener for a much longer medley rock opera song. That the whole thing was going to be called Splitsville. And so I wrote what on this is the first, like that first like punk rock song on this track, and then the last part, the acoustic one. Those were both written during the first album sessions. I didn't have, like, they were for sure going to be the first and last, but I didn't have anything to put in between them, and I had that acoustic Splitsville song as the prelude, and I just wasn't sure where to take it. And when that first album was finishing up, I just wanted to have it out, so I cut Splitsville. I cut Splitsville and decided to just keep that as an intro, and I saved the medley format for something else. And then I wrote 2 middle sections, so there's 4 main songs, and then the song is bookended by a reprise of the first song on this album. And so I had this idea of just kind of, and really I should actually go back and talk about Here We Go Again, which was another of the songs that I had here, because that song really shaped how this whole album was going to be. So Here We Go Again was written in November, right after the election. I was very unhappy with the result. I'm still unhappy with the result. And I just wanted to write a song about my feelings at the time, and it was enough just to get a verse and a chorus. And then I held off on it because then I decided to make the Jaded EP, and, that song would not have made any sense there. And I also figured, like, well, look, we gotta let this thing start, we gotta see what happens. And so, January came, then February, and March, and sometime during March I decided to stop thinking about where to take that song and just start writing, because I needed a second verse, and I needed to figure out how the song was going to end. So I kept in mind what I've been seeing, I do try to keep up on the news and everything, so I've been updating it, and by March I had a pretty perfect version of what I wanted this song to be. And really, when I looked at that song and just how overtly political it was, it pretty much drove the direction of this album as a whole. And that's what really pushed this idea of the whole theme of social consciousness on this album, where this is easily the most socially conscious piece of work I've ever put out. Like, it's not just putting It's Our Turn Now on the second album and that being the one and only. Like, no. This whole album, for the most part, touches on, even if just a little bit, touches on something that is me looking at the world around me and just commenting on it and talking about it. And so that song was really, really, really a solid blueprint on where to take things. That's when Body Dysmorphia Blues decided to be about fashion and beauty. That's when The World As I Know It, to then move on to that again, that's when The World As I Know It became just about watching this collapse and watching what feels like the world just totally caving in on itself around me and feeling like just hopeless and like there's nothing you can do about it. And just wishing you didn't even have to live through it. And then that also brought in a song like Another Day, Another Fight, which is it started out as just this idea. I really wanted to make a Talking Heads type song, something with a groove, a funky beat on it. And I had this idea, I made up the chords, I had the instrumental pretty solid, and it took me forever to find lyrics for it. And then I had another song called Up All Night, which originally had the lyrics for what became Another Day, Another Fight. Up All Night was supposed to be more like the pop song, the closest thing to the pop song on this album. It's definitely more pop rock and even more like a new wave kind of song. But that song also didn't have lyrics at the time. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, and they were both pretty interlinked in my mind when I was recording this album. Another Day, Another Fight actually really began as a song about me and some friends and just stuff we do and hanging out, staying up late, and I realized just whatever lyrics I had, I wasn't liking. It wasn't meshing well with the song. So I was like, all right, well, this isn't working. And then I decided to put those lyrics, rewrite them, revise them, and put them on Up All Night. And I found that I liked that way better. So Up All Night then became what it is now. And then Another Day, Another Fight, I had to think of something else. Like, okay, well, what do I want this song to be about now? And then I came to this idea of just, it's the song about being a defense of like LGBTQ and women and just not understanding of the people that just hate on these people for existing or that are so just okay with taking away rights. And even in the song it starts with me saying that, oh, I was watching the news and there's, they were saying that we had some kind of problem, and just it doesn't make any sense to me why that people would be just so hateful over people that are just living their lives, and why that we should be taking away rights from like gay people and from women that actually probably contribute some of the most to our society. And to those that really take such issue with it, that maybe you should look at yourself sometime and maybe you realize that somewhere along the line you are the problem and not all these other people. There might be issues inside you just haven't dealt with, and you know it's really just kind of a big fuck you to that kind of people. And it's one that was definitely inspired by my own life. Like, I live in a very conservative town, and even at my job, most of my coworkers are pretty conservative, so I hear a lot of this kind of stuff a lot. And to me, I, as much as I'd like to say something, I typically don't when I'm at work, but I definitely am thinking about just constantly, like, dude, what are you saying? Like, why are we okay, like, just being like this? It just never made sense to me. And that actually makes me also think about then the intro song. Prehistory, unlike the last two albums where the intro song was pretty much written at the last second, Prehistory was actually written like somewhere in the middle. I had the idea for that once I knew that I wanted it to be a socially conscious album. I decided that the intro should really set that up. And so, with taking some inspiration from the interlude segment from Homecoming by Green Day, um, just taking an acoustic guitar, kind of making it sound like it's going through a radio filter, and just singing about the hypocrisy of those that raised you, and about how, we grow up being told to treat everybody with respect and to love your country and love other people. And then when you grow up, you kind of start to look around and see those people that taught you that doing the exact opposite, and how that doesn't really make any sense. And you start to see a lot of just, again, hypocrisy all around you. And I guess I'm almost kind of like getting radicalized and just seeing all these things that, when you were a kid, you were totally like, you didn't know about, you didn't think about, and finally becoming just aware of, what's really going on around you, and realizing that maybe the people that taught you these things were not the best teachers in the world. And, it's just trying to embrace your individuality in a world that absolutely detests that. And I thought it was a very, very strong intro. And probably in terms of actually setting up the album to come, this was the best intro I think I've ever done. Although I will say, Wasting Away on the last album, if we're just talking about how I like it as a song, Wasting Away and this one are probably tied. But thematically, this is the best. This is the best one for the flow of the album that comes after it. And I thought also then it would be very appropriate that for The World as I Know It, the title track at the end of the album, that should bookend that medley. Have a reprise of it at the beginning, and have a reprise at the end, where the song on every iteration, the song ends on a D minor, and it doesn't resolve itself, and just ends on this note of, "Won't you come live it with me?" Like, we don't know where this is gonna go. Let's ride this together. And it really, to me, just felt like I really had something with there's not an actual story. There's not like characters really. It's just a thematic thing, and I think it starts and ends. You can tell that there's a connection, and I'm really proud of the way I let this go. And yeah, and then the album ends on the thematic part of the album is pretty much track 1 to 11. Those are the main, this is what the album is mostly about. Where track 12, When I'm Gone, is really more like an epilogue. Here's another one we threw on, and it's more like a reflection, and doesn't, at least in terms of the theme, doesn't really have much to do with the whole socially conscious thing. It's actually probably the most internal song on the album, and I wanted it to kind of be like a stylistic homage to What's Her Name by Green Day, where, and also just in general, this last track order, like 10, 11, 12, is I Wish I Could See It Again, World as I Know It, When I'm Gone, kind of mirroring Wake Me Up With Some Ends, Homecoming, What's Her Name, on American Idiot. And I just think that was the perfect way to have those tracks flow together. And I just, because that was, to me, it's such a strong end to that album, and I thought having the same energy, and really when I look at the whole track list, I don't actually see another way that these could be arranged where it makes sense. So it's just, everything is put together with a lot of thought, and it just, I think the puzzle pieces have really been put together in just the most perfect way compared to the other ones, where I think there is wiggle room maybe on the other ones. You could argue, that, oh, well, some of these could have been flipped around, and maybe this goes better here, or not even on the album at all. I think this album, every track is necessary. I think each one has something unique to say, and like I said, it's my absolute proudest work. Last individual song I'll mention is I Wish I Could See It Again, which actually it came to me like weeks before I decided it was done. I didn't even have chords for this one. It just kind of came to me. I was nostalgic, just in like a little phase of just, reminiscing about the past. And there's this song that I grew up with. Now, I'm 21. I grew up in like the late 2000s and the 2010s. So a lot of my early music memories come from that era. And a song that I absolutely loved as a really little kid was Bubbly by Colby Calais. And just the way that song, every time I hear that, it evokes just so much like, oh my god, this brings me back to being like 4, being in like kindergarten. And I love the way that song is strummed, and just the chords on that song. It all comes together. So I kind of inspired by that song, and just generally this idea of nostalgia and just thinking about the past, I wanted to write this song about looking back on the past, kind of wishing for this simpler life, still kind of adhering to what the album's about this world that is just in such a mess, and this song wishing for some kind of escape and to kind of get away from that. It doesn't point out any of the, say, political or social points of the rest of the album, but it definitely makes sense as like okay, well, you've seen all of this happen. I wish I could go back. You know, back to when you didn't have to worry as a kid. You don't have to worry about anything. Things were so simple. It's just wishing you didn't have to deal with all this shit that you've gone through. And again, as I've said about a few tracks on this album, it is one of my absolute favorites. I wrote it pretty quickly. It was one where I just knew exactly what I wanted to say. And like I said, that last three tracks on this album, I think, are three of the strongest. And I think the album has such a strong start, and I think it has such a strong end. And it has got a strong middle too. I actually do genuinely really think that this track order, like I just said, I think it flows so nicely. I think this is the best track run order I've ever done. And I really can't wait for you to hear it. I really can't wait to hear that you've heard it. And yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for, you know, this record analysis. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to me ramble on about, this album and these songs. And I hope you'll look forward to whatever I've got coming up in the future. And until then, I'm going to keep working. So I hope you enjoy. I hope you listen to the album. Again, it's out everywhere. You can hear it all over. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.